two exceptional guests down here with me. Wendy Lecker is a senior attorney for the Campaign for Fiscal Equity, which is now a project of the Education Law Center. She also has 3 kids in public schools between the ages of 12 and 17. And to her right, we have Zakia Ansari, who is, you apparently have a fan club, advocacy director for the Alliance for Quality Education. She's also a public school parent of 8 kids, ranging in age from 12 to 26, and apparently a grandmother. So this panel is the plenary. We're going to be discussing how New York State can get back on track with educational success. And what we're going to do is ask Wendy and Zakia to discuss the quality of education, if it's improving or if it's going down the tubes. How classroom cuts are affecting students and their ability to learn. School financing, how that's affecting students and the solutions that they want to offer. So Wendy, why don't we start with you? Is this thing on?
Oh, it is? Okay.
Let me help.
Hello, can you hear me?
I'm going to give you this.
Okay.
Mine's close.
Yours on?
I kind of wish we didn't have to prove over and over again that resources are connected to the quality of education. The essence of the CFE case was that educational quality is directly connected to resources. New York's highest court saw the overwhelming evidence in CFE of a causal link between deprivation of resources and the deprivation of a sound basic education. To quote the decision, the judge said, tens of thousands of students are placed in overcrowded classrooms, taught by unqualified teachers, and provided with inadequate facilities and equipment. The number of children in these straits is large enough to represent a systemic failure. Unfortunately, if you come up and look at this poster after, it sounds very familiar. The main culprit in depriving our children of basic educational tools, the court found, was the New York schools finance system, which, as the court said, allocated aid in a political process that bore no perceptible relation to the needs of students. The court ruled that in order to give all children in New York City a sound basic education, which the court defined as a meaningful high school education, the state must provide its schools with sufficient resources. And to do so, it needed to fix the school finance system. And in 2007, the legislature recognized that its constitutional obligation extended to all children in the state, not just New York City. The 2007 Foundation Aid Formula for the first time established a relationship between state school aid, student need, and a district's ability to raise revenue. The new money was to be phased in over 4 years. But as we all know, since 2009, the state has reneged on its duty. According to the region's current estimate, our schools are being shortchanged approximately $5.5 billion in foundation aid. Together with the gap elimination aid cuts of about $2.2 billion, our schools are now short almost $8 billion. This huge gap has a devastating real-life effect on our schools and kids. Schools across the state are now on the brink of bankruptcy. The vast majority of schools and school districts in this state predict that they will be educationally insolvent within the next 4 years. All those resources that are fundamental to a sound basic education are being cut. Class sizes in New York City, and I'm sure Zakia will tell you, are the largest they've been in 14 years. Thousands of teacher positions are gone, along with counselors, speech and language therapists, and other critical staff. Most districts are cutting services for our neediest kids, tutoring, after-school help, help for English language learners. Music, art, sports, foreign languages, elective, AP courses, extracurriculars, all gone. If you just take a look at the Canton School District's website, they've cut foreign language in the middle school, band, psychology, painting, trigonometry, music classes, engineering classes, sports teams, dramas. Their school systems are being decimated, and this story repeats itself across the state. We know there are kids who will only stay in school for art or sports. That's the way we get them to learn. And without AP classes and electives and sports and extracurricular activities, even our students who are doing well can't compete in the college application process. We are destroying the futures of these kids and the future of our state. So how do we stop this hemorrhaging? Let me just back up for a minute and say, in addition to underfunding the formula, The legislature has added mechanisms that prevent the formula from being funded at a rate even approaching acceptable. Between the GEA cuts and the cap on state aid, the formula that the legislature intended in 2007 to be phased in 4 years can't possibly be funded until 2028. At the current rate of funding, we will lose 2 more generations of kids before the state even begins to live up to its constitutional obligation. Unfortunately, this year's budget does nothing to reverse this downward spiral. The budget proposes an $889 million or 4.4% increase. This increase is similar to last year's, which didn't prevent deep cuts in the classroom. In fact, it drove our districts closer to failure. And it isn't really a 4.4% increase. Of that money, $125 million are competitive grants. When our districts can't even get basic level of funding they need and deserve, we can't make them fight each other for it. Another $203 million is a one-time fiscal stabilization fund, which is not to become part of any district's base. So the real increase for districts is much smaller, and this means more and more cuts right in the classroom. We can do better than that, and we have to do better than that. So for the short term, we simply need more money to be put in the foundation formula. The state must find the money to invest in our children, or they will fail. And other things to do, we need to move the $203 million into the base. Don't make it a one-shot deal when schools are starting. The same with competitive grants. And for the long term, the only solution is to put the 2007 foundation formula back on track. That means increasing funding, and that means getting rid of those mechanisms that work against adequate and equitable funding. Pay back the GEA, get rid of the state aid cap, and put it back on a 4-year phase-in track. It's a matter of political will, and our legislature showed that political will and courage back in 2007. It's time for them to show that same resolve again. Thanks.
Thank you, Wendy. Zakia Ansari, again, is the AQE Advocacy Director.
So before I start, I want the young people in the audience to stand up. If you're in school, high school, elementary school, middle school, just stand up for me. Everybody give them a round of applause. Just keep standing for a minute, because I just wanted to acknowledge that as we are in the month of Black History Month, I'm reminded over and over again, every time we struggle around this educational issue, that it was civil rights and everything else. It was your voice. It was the voice of the young people that pushed and forced change. And we need you, whether you ask for it or not, to be that change once again. We know you care about your education. We know you have a lot to say about it because you are the ones most impacted by the changes that are going on. And when the funding is not in the schools, you are the ones that lose the most. So we need you to take this mantle on. We stand with you, stand side by side you, in ensuring that we as a collective are taking care of you, and we want your voice to be out there as well. So I want to say thank you all for coming and participating. Keep your voices strong, know that you have support, and sometimes we as adults try to smother you. It's okay to say step back, right? We got this, and it's really important for you to be able to do that in a respectful way, but know that we do it because we care about you, and when we see people trying to hurt you in regards to not funding your education fully or taking valuable programs away from you, it is our job, and we feel like in our heart we have to step up and stand up. So thank you. So my story starts as a public school parent, like was shared, of 8 children. Some of them who have all been educated under, it's interesting, 4 have pretty much all been educated under the current mayor of New York City, Mayor Bloomberg, and the 4 older ones were not. And so I can definitely see the difference in the foundation that the older ones received in regards to whether it was early childhood education or just that there wasn't this main focus on testing, that teachers were allowed to teach in the class, that it was fun, as opposed to the 4 younger ones where you start seeing more the regime of the testing piece that, you know, you have to be learning this on Monday and this on Tuesday and that on Wednesday. And it wasn't this flexibility that teachers had to really ensure that children had these critical thinking skills and they were able to really utilize different things. So I clearly understand, obviously, the importance of not having funding in schools. In New York City, we've seen billions of dollars in cuts over the last few years, just like the rest of the state. Which has caused us to lose many of the things that Wendy talked about, quality after-school programs, Year after year, we're standing up on steps of City Hall fighting for early childhood education programs to not be cut, even though 25 years of research shows that that's the best thing you can do and invest in is early childhood education. We have to fight every time tooth and nail. The way this has impacted me, one example is, one of my daughters, who is currently in her first year of college, went to Benjamin Banneker Academy in Brooklyn. And from that transition, and Cynthia talked about this before, the importance of a summer academy. They offered this summer bridge program. It was a 6-week program. And of course, you're going from middle school to high school. The last thing you want to do is spend 6 weeks before high school going to school, right? But it was something that they understood the importance of that it not only did it acclimate the student to the school, so when they got there in September, they were already, knew some of their teachers, etc. But they charted backwards and said, well, if our children need to be college and career ready, then by the time they graduate, they need to have taken pre-cal. And in order for them to have taken that, by the summer, they should have mastered these particular regions by then. So she had a 6-week program. She wasn't happy about going. She went. It was great. She passed her regions. So she was able to get into September. She was already on board. So she graduated, and then my youngest daughter attended the same school. Within a 2-year period, they had to cut the program from a 6-week to a 3-week program. Now, you know, she wasn't still happy about going for 3 weeks, but the point is that those extra 3 weeks was a really valuable experience for those young people to have, right? It was something that they knew that once they finished, they were ready and prepared for September, that they were comfortable in going, that they had friends already, that they were on point and on schedule to have passed pre-cal and everything else. And I might say that my oldest daughter that went there, actually, you know, by the time she was in 12th grade, she didn't have to take any regents or anything like that. So they really chart you out in the right way. So that's just one example of how these cuts really affect. So my younger daughter didn't have that experience. She's currently in 10th grade. She's been fortunate she was able to pass some of those regions as well, but it does have an impact still. 3 weeks is a big difference from 6 weeks, right? And this is whether you want to go or not. So we also know that some of our most struggling students in school rely on music and art, right? They rely on gym. They rely on great after-school programs. They rely on things like that to keep them to say, if I can make it through this double period of reading, and I know next period I have music, which I love, then that's a powerful thing. I can hang in there for 2 periods, right? But when you know at the end of the day, you have double period of math, double period of reading, double period of whatever else, the academics, and you don't have any of the extracurricular stuff, that for every child, that's not what they're not necessarily into the academics all the time. And I don't know many children, some young people just need to like slow your brain down. Adults need to slow your brain down sometimes. So these cuts have really devastated schools to the point where many of our schools can't offer AP courses, right? Those advanced placement courses we know. Like I said, my 4 older daughters had access to some high schools that offer that, SAT 2s and all those things that a lot of schools don't even know about now, high schools. Those things can't be provided, it costs money. But we also know in the more affluent areas, they are there in numbers. They have numerous SAT 2s and all kind of subjects. That they have AP courses that you can go from A to Z. And the question always is for me, why isn't it happening in all schools? And it should be happening in all schools. Robert Jackson talked about him being a parent. He was a parent, just like many of us in this room, who started the campaign for fiscal equity. Because he believes, he's as passionate today as he was then. But I think the power in that he started as a parent, he realized what he saw was wrong. He stepped up to the plate, put his name, and put on his shoes to walk to Albany. Right? That's the power that parents and communities hold, and young people. That is the power that we hold to be able to do those things. And what we have to do, as we talk today, is ensure that we clearly have the public will to make change. For them to tell the state legislature they need to keep the promises they made in funding the campaign through fiscal equity. The public will is there. Many of y'all in your own cities and towns have been pushing back for this for many years. I know in New York City, endless times I've been at press conferences, cold, snow, sleet, sun bearing down on you, you got sunburn, to say, fund our schools and keep your promise. And you know, as a parent, and even as young people, somebody says, I promise something to you. You gotta hold them to that promise. You don't break the promise, right? Because the first thing is our opportunity is to then step up and say, you broke your promise. And that's what we're gonna do with the state legislature, is say, keep your promises to us. The other thing I just want to say and close with this is that our schools, our young people are the most precious resource we have, our public schools. And until we are ready, I think, like, I don't know if Ms. Evie is in the room. I see her hat up there. Until we are ready to stand up a grandma who's raising 7 of our own grandchildren, when we have young people that are ready to stand up and say no more, when we have somebody like Robert Jackson, who I have to give him kudos, because I don't know many elected officials who never ever waver, who you can say wholeheartedly that is an educational champion like Robert Jackson. So I give him kudos for that. But we are here today. We will be here tomorrow. You'll hear about, we will be here March 5th to hold our state legislature, our governor, and everyone else we need to hold accountable to ensure that our schools are properly funded. Because when other neighborhoods are saying that money doesn't matter, maybe I'll listen. But when I know that in areas like Scarsdale and other parts of the state know the importance, or like Riverdale in Manhattan, they understand the importance of money. They understand why their children need to have all these great programs, extracurricular, all kind of sports programs, because it makes them a well-rounded young person, and it makes them something that a college wants to look at. I don't care whether you're rich, poor, or middle class. You always want better for your children than what you had. It's no different if you're poor. We want our children to be successful just like everyone else, because guess what? We want them to grow up, be productive adults, and leave our homes. We love you, but we want you out. So, as we stand today here, this is just the beginning, right? And we need the collective voice. I think it was over and over again spoken about, the collective voice of all of us. No matter if we're suburban, rural, big city, small city, urban. All of us, it's time for us to step up, ensure that our state legislature keeps this promise, and in one voice, and in one voice.
I think I see some elected officials walking down the steps with Billy Easton. Let's give them a hand for joining us. Again, this is the plenary session. It's called Educational Success, the Path to Get Back on Track. And we've met Wendy Lecker, who is the attorney for the Campaign for Fiscal Equity. We've met Zakia Ansari, who is the advocacy director for AQE. And we're just about to meet a couple other people, including John Flanagan, who is the chair of the Education Committee in the New York State Senate, and Catherine Nolan, who's the chair of the Education Committee in the New York State Assembly. It's great to see you guys. So I understand that there was a session, and you can't be absent for votes, especially ones that are important. Who would like to begin? We're going to begin with...
We're not to put John on the spot, but he has to get back for another vote, and we're kind of wrapping up, so...
All right, so...
We'll have to defer his time constraints.
Again, the opening remarks, we're hoping that you can touch on the quality of education. Is it improving or getting worse? The classroom cuts, how are they affecting kids? School financing, and the solutions you'd offer.
Wow, okay. That's a loaded menu, but thank you for the invitation, and I will try to be as succinct as possible, and then I always try to let ladies go first, but Kathy is respecting what we're doing. Just by way of background, today the Senate is doing confirmation on a nomination by the governor to the Court of Appeals, so it's, that's a pretty hefty order. It's an important policy position, and given the fact that the nominee is 52 years old, there's a good chance she will be on the court for at least 18 years. So while we're here, there's always serious work going on, whether it's in health or transportation or education, but very quickly and respectfully to everyone in the room, I do chair the Senate Education Committee. This is my 27th year in Albany. I've been here a little shorter than my colleague and my friend to the right, and I have been chair of the committee now for my 3rd year, and I do hail from Long Island, Suffolk County. I live in the Northport School District, and I would say a couple of very basic things. The only way we can prove to you and the people in this room and the people outside this room is that education is our #1 priority is by making sure we properly fund it and that it is the single largest component of our state expenditures. And some years we've done that well, and other years we haven't done it as well. That's #1. #2, There is absolutely nothing more important and more effective than a good, strong teacher in front of the classroom. Technology and bricks and mortar all make a difference, but if you don't have a good teacher in front of the classroom, everything else is secondary. In relation to where we are, given what's going on in our economy, I would just offer a couple of very basic points. Whether we have a property tax cap or not, which could probably be a 5-day debate independent of this forum, I think it's very important to recognize, again, that the single most important thing we can do is properly fund education here in the state of New York. And we will always have a debate about what that number will be, how much money should go to the city of New York, how much money should go to Northport, how much money should go to our rural schools, high needs, low wealth, high needs, however one describes it. That's going to be a continued part of the discussion, and it should be a healthy and robust part of the discussion. I believe we are seeing some fundamental changes in how we educate kids in the state of New York, and I am very concerned about districts being on the brink of insolvency, and you can have insolvency from a legal standpoint, you can have it from a fiscal standpoint, if you will, you can have it from a practical standpoint. And whether it's Kathy Nolan or John Flanagan, we hear it from districts all across the state raising concerns about where our educational progress is going or not. We both sat as members of the Governor's Education Reform Commission. We issued a preliminary report. I think there were people here who were actually in some of the commission meetings. And there was plenty of good testimony. So you were asking where I think we are in terms of educational policy. We're a little bit scattered. We have some pockets where things are going extraordinarily well, and we have other areas where we have serious concerns that have yet to be properly addressed. You can look right within the city of New York and find some outstanding things that are going on, and then you can move into our rural communities and see some schools that are doing it well and other schools that are not. So in my humble opinion, what we need to be doing is looking at the successes and how do we replicate those. If it's a model from outside the state of New York, how do we take that, embrace it, and make it work here in the state of New York? So funding is the most critical part. How we look at other parts of the state and how we work together, I think, is extraordinarily important. And one of the upsides, or the upshots of the commission is that there's a lot of stuff going on in education, but the communication isn't always as good as it needs to be or should. What works in one area may not be properly shared in another. So I think there are a lot of things that we need to address. I work very closely with all of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, frankly, in both houses. There's no pride of authorship. If there's a better way to do something, we should be listening. But I'll close with what I started with, and that is we have to make sure that we are properly funding education in every district and every community across the state of New York. Thank you.
Kathy Nolan?
Thank you very much. I'm really glad to be here today. I'm really glad to be part of this panel, particularly with my friend Zaki Ansari. I'm very happy, and the other panelists, and my colleague and partner in, I don't want to say in crime, but partner in education policy, Senator John Flanagan. Both of us have been privileged to be in the legislature for a long time, and I do joke about that because sometimes people must say we're part of the problem, but we don't think so. We think we make a difference, and you know, the tradition in legislatures of having people with seniority take on difficult assignments, you know, I think because both of us have a long legislative experience, we can sometimes thread through an issue to find a compromise and to find a way to move forward. One of the things I want to say to AQE and to thank you for doing this, the longer I chair the committee, the more I realize that there's an important role for an advocacy group like this. Because one of the problems is that each side in these education debates will claim the children, will claim the moral high ground. Each side will claim local control and centralization all at the same time. It's always so interesting. But you have an ability here to kind of cut through that and be a voice. Even this, I'm in Albany 30 years. You know, I was never in this room before. I mean, sometimes the education community, I think, which for many years was the single largest expenditure, it is not anymore. Healthcare spending has surpassed it. But I think there's a tendency sometimes to be a little inward looking because there's always so many contentious discussions within the education field. You know, credentialism, if we have a bar exam for teachers, does that mean that we're over-credentializing? You know, how do we let people who come into the field who might not have, you know, so many credits in an ed school, but have something else to contribute? So we're often contradictory in what we're asked to look at. But sometimes I find maybe because of that, education looks inward. So even here, I'm in Albany so many years, and yet I didn't even know this beautiful auditorium existed. I'm ready to bring up some people from my community to let them enjoy it. And I think that's something that a group like yours can do. You can open up what sometimes seems like the mysteries of Albany to everyone, to every active parent, to active young people. So I'm here to see what you have to say. I will report back to Senator Flanagan because I know he has to go back for that vote, and it's very important. But I really look forward, and I say this all the time to education groups, to more of a dialogue. Don't assume that I know what your position is. Speak out, jump in, look at the bills, read the bills, tell us what you think of the governor's budget proposals. The lists of things that are on our plate for this session alone are very, very critical. And so we welcome your input. I don't know where Billy Easton is, but I want to thank him. There he is. I feel very close to Billy and the work he does. I envy him being an organizer because that's what I really like to do as an assemblywoman, but we try in our own local community to kind of bring it home and speak truth to power and keep focused on what's real, but we need you to have that dialogue with us, and Billy does it all the time, and I appreciate that. So I think we're here to take some questions too, is that?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you very much. I hope we covered the topics. A little bit on the floor.
It was great. So we are going to take some questions, and we have somebody walking around with the microphone until we get, so just raise your hand. And okay, great. Until we get there, let's just ask one quickie question. In terms of the $125 million in competitive grants, is that something that you think needs to go? John Flanagan?
This is one of the things where you have to compromise, you have to negotiate, and you have to have respect for the various entities that are involved in this process. I'm not a fan of competitive grants. I'm not going to dance around it. I would much rather see money driven right into formulas. But when the governor came into office, he had an orientation, which he is certainly entitled to push in a direction. And if you look at what happened last year, there was a proposal for about $250 million in competitive grants that the legislature pared back. We took $200 million of that money and redistributed it to districts across the state of New York. And I think I've probably made it clear to you that that's something that I supported and would continue to advocate for. If you look at the money, and I'm assuming the 125 is a reference to part of what we enacted last year, and the 75 that's proposed for this year, it's going to be part of the debate. Do I think it's going to end up in the budget? Yes, but I will also tell you this. If you look at the competitive grants that are in there, extended school day, the pre-K piece, master teachers and things like that, those are good things. They are good things. Maybe we can have a legitimate debate about whether or not they should be a grant process or it should be distributed based on the formula, but I'll put it in a positive light and say 75 of that money is directed in areas where we got very strong input from people like the folks right in this room today. So, not a huge fan. I'd rather have the money directed in a different way, but this is about compromise at the end of the day, and I hope that these programs prove to be beneficial so that maybe we can move them from a grant to a formula-based approach.
Did you want to answer?
Yeah, I don't have any particular objection to categorical type grants, but I share Senator Flanagan's concern that the formula has to be first, and the most aid to the groups that have the most need needs to be our kind of guiding wisdom as we go through all the taxpayer dollars that are spent on education. I think that for me, many of you, some of you may know, I've been a bit vocal on connecting performance to the formula, and I've been very unhappy that the agreement that the city and the union made, the city of New York made on teacher evaluation was linked to increases in formula aid, and now because they couldn't agree, kids in my city get penalized for that, and I find that completely unacceptable. So I certainly want to try to work to change that going forward and even go back retroactively. I don't want that penalty assessed on my kids. Having said that, I've actually thought that maybe we could incentivize some of these categoricals, the reality being the governor did get some money last time and probably will this time in the compromise. And if you say if people can't agree they can't participate in a categorical, there's some penalty, but it's not the same as taking it out of the neediest kids in the largest chunk of money that goes to the formula. So, and as Senator Flanagan said, most of the categorical things the governor wants to do came out of the commission, so there's some support for them. Would I prefer to see it in the formula? Yes, I would. But I think going forward we'll have to, as he said, compromise and see what happens in the give and take. Your thoughts on that, your support for formula funding, your support to continue under the CFE and try to go back to doing more foundation funding would be very critical, and that we need to hear that voice, because sometimes the groups that want pre-K or whatever, you know, will take that deal and perhaps not be as vocal as they need to be. I'm not singling them out, I'm just pointing out the reality of that. So we need you to put your voice in this debate.
So, yeah, I would like Zakia. Would you like to comment on the competitive grants, just generally?
Yeah, I mean, I think just in the nature of being a competition, that it's a struggle, right? Because there's winners and losers, and I think a lot of what people are saying here is that our children are already losing. So when you talk about competition, it goes, so which other child now do we choose that doesn't have AP courses, that doesn't have music? And while we believe those things that are in there under the competitive grant are things that many of us push for, whether it's expanded learning time, which Cynthia talked about, or early childhood education, which I talked about, that is something that should be given to all children and not through competition.
Wendy Lecker?
I think Zakia said that very well. The only thing I'd add to that is that, you know, a lot of these struggling school districts don't have the capacity to compete for these funds. They're cut to the bone, so you're excluding, when you make it competitive, you're excluding a lot of those districts.
I would urge people to look on the SED website. The grantees for the two $50 million programs are out. There's a broad range of districts included in those grants. You know, again, give us your feedback if you feel that there are people that were excluded. But that list is out there. It just takes a little clicking on the SED website to find it. I just got it.
So we have an abbreviated timetable today, but we have time for one, maybe two questions.
Thank you, and I'm so glad you brought up this topic of the competitive grants, because the superintendent of Rockland County has put together a report showing how Race to the Top funding is bankrupting districts. Maybe $150,000 comes in and $1.5 million has to be expended to execute reforms, quote, that aren't even proven reforms. So my question to our two legislators and also to Wendy Lecker is, would it be legal, is it permissible for districts to say, no, we don't want this funding, we want to fund what we need here in our district, we don't need teacher evaluations, we don't need charter schools, we don't need whatever it is that those two streams of funding, SIG and RTT, are funding, which are really only a closed loop of ed reformism.
Wendy?
Wow, I did read that study, and I recommend it to everyone. It really points out how some of these mandates are cost more than the funding attached to them. Race to the Top, if I am not mistaken, was something that districts could elect to be in, whereas the waiver was not something that they could elect to be in. So, you know, once you've gotten the money, then you're mandated to put it out. I would assume that, you know, to implement those reforms. But you had as a district, you had the opportunity not to join in, I believe. I'm not sure with the state Race to the Top as well, I think. I can't, you know what, I have to check that, I can't remember. But I think that with Race to the Top, whereas with the ESEA flexibility, the NCLB waiver, which have a lot of the same mandates, unfortunately, the entire state is bound to that without having had the choice. So, but I can get back to you on whether the Race to the Top funding. I would think the penalty is that you say you don't get the funding.
I think, you know, Assemblywoman Jaffe is very active in Rockland County on this issue, and Assemblyman Zabrowski. I think, you know, you need to talk to your local representatives. But, you know, President Obama proposed Race to the Top. Most money is in the formula. This is a little bit on top to try to steer the ship in a way that the president wanted it steered to. I support that, and I, you know, have been involved in the legislature in making some of that happen. If your district is not happy with it, you need to talk to your local people in your local region and see what options you have. But I would urge you to think about Race to the Top as an opportunity to enhance what you do in a way that's, you know, I think has the respect of the federal department and then in turn the state education department.
I think I'm going to come as a cross between the two. I would largely agree with what Wendy said. If the Race to the Top money, districts can turn that money down, but based on other factors, including the waiver, and clearly statements from SED through the Commission and the Board of Regents, arguably you have to do all those things anyway. Now, you may not like that, but that's part of the way it stands right now. The race to the top money, you could argue that it's not enough. We have debates about whether or not there's enough money for teacher evaluation costs, the implementation of APPR, but based on the statements from SED, I would respectfully suggest that whether one takes the race to the top money or not, you're bound by certain obligations that are essentially the same anyway.
I think that we are out of time. Oh, we have 10 more minutes. Oh, okay. Two or 10? 10. 10, okay, terrific. What we're going to do is take another question.
Yes, my name is Lakia.
And thank you, Senator Flanagan.
A parent of a student in Yonkers Public Schools.
I apologize. One more time.
My name is Lakia Hill. I'm a parent of a student in Yonkers Public Schools. And I just wanted to ask the senators if they were going to be adding more money to the governor's budget.
If they're going to be adding more money to the government. Right. Okay, so that would be a great question for Catherine Nolan.
I'm here 29 years, and in 29 years, we've almost always added something. But I don't think you should assume that, because times are tough. The amount of money spent is very, very big. And we're talking over $20 billion. When I started here, it was $8 billion. So just, put yourself, that's a lot of money. So, we can urge, we can advocate. I know I'm sending in letters to the leadership for millions of dollars of additional programs in education. I would call to your attention, for example, changes in things like the GED. So it isn't just elementary and secondary that we need to focus on, it's adult ed, but I wouldn't necessarily count on it. I mean, the governor gave a pretty comprehensive proposal. I think it might make sense to look at the fiscal stabilization fund he's created, the $203 million, and whether that ought to be incorporated into the formula, or whether that number should get higher, and then the issue of whether there's going to be a lawsuit. So it's all in flux right now. I couldn't tell you definitely one way or the other. A budget is passed April 1st, but for many years, as you probably know, even though you're very young, the state, you look so nice and young and enthusiastic, as many of you older folks may know, the budget was late for many, many years, and the school districts hated that. So we've actually gone to a bit of a 2-year thing so that districts have some ability to plan, even if we're late in our negotiations. But under Governor Cuomo, we have not been late, and I don't think that we will be late again. We're on a very fast track to get this budget done for April 1st. And then you'll know, they send out the school runs. And, I would say, again, having been here so long and sort of in the pre-internet age, so many things in Albany used to be like a big secret. You had to know someone to get the copy out of the packet of information. That's not the case anymore. Keep looking at those websites, get the information you need. And I would also say, if you want to see more money in education, that's part of what this forum was about. Go out and lobby your local people so that they know, because I will say to you, you don't get the numbers that you think in education to lobby the way. I've been surprised, unpleasantly surprised, in the time I've chaired committee at the lack of involvement of so many in coming up here and advocating for more dollars. It's not the great surge that you think it would be, so keep involved.
I want to just use that question as a jumping off point for Zakia and Wendy real quick. If there are people in this room who do come to Albany to lobby, like Assemblyman Nolan mentioned, sometimes there will be, the governor's office might say something like, well, we've increased your funding by 4.4%, plus we increased it last year. How would you come back to that sort of, how do you respond to that retort?
I mean, I think a lot of it was talked about today, right? The cuts hurt. What you've given has not even covered the inflation. We can tell you what has been cut. We've shown it. We have signs back here, library instruction clubs. If we don't think those things will be cut some more this year, we're fooling ourselves. We clearly know. And I think the other thing that we say to the governor and others that say that, and I think what I want us to be clear about is listening to the Assemblywoman. I have the utmost respect for this woman. But she is saying, again, it's the public will that has to push the political will. And I said this before. It has to be us that says we want this, not because we just want it, because you deserve it. The young people in this room deserve it. They needed to have a quality education. If we're all about doing that, then we need to make sure that we fully fund this. And that's the question we need to be saying to each and every one of our legislators. Will you fund our public schools? No ifs, ands, or buts, no roundabout, I don't know, I gave the money last year, blah, blah, blah. Because each and every time we should be having this picture saying, well, the money that you gave did not stop these cuts from happening. The money that you give this year is still not going to stop these cuts from happening. So if we're telling you that it's not going to do that, then clearly you need to fund our schools. And we have to hold them accountable. We put them in office. You young people are going to be 18. You can sit there and hold that power and say, before November or whenever it's time to re-elect you, I will be 18 and be registered to vote. And I will be organizing the young people in my school and in my community to register to vote. So what's the answer again? Oh, you're going to fund our public schools. That's what I thought.
I think we're going to probably have to wrap it up there, which is a great note to wrap it up on. So let's thank Wendy and Zakiya and Assemblyman Catherine Nolan. Thank you, and thank you for your great questions.